Alright, today we're going to learn about factoring and solving quadratic functions. There's a few different methods. We're going to first do factoring by the box method. You always have to make sure that you factor out the GCF. This will make your math a little easier when finding the factors. So we're going to look at the quadratic of 9x squared minus 21x minus 18. The common factor between 9, 21, and 18 is 3, so factoring out, I'm left with the product of 3 times the quantity of 3x squared minus 7x minus 6. So what you're going to do is you're going to label your terms. Your terms are 3x squared minus 7x minus 6. Your first term is the x squared term. Your third term is your constant or your number. You want to put these terms in the appropriate spots on a box. So you're going to make a quadrant, and it is going to be your first term and third term in the respective diagonal. So we put 3x squared in the upper left, and then we put negative 6 in the bottom right. Multiply your first and third terms, so when you take 3x squared minus negative 6, or times negative 6, excuse me, you get the product of negative 18x squared. What you're going to do now is you're going to find the products of the factors of negative 18 that add up to your second term. Your second term is negative 7. So the factors of negative 18, some that I put out, are negative 1, 18, negative 2, 9, 2, and negative 9, with their x's because that's what you're going to use in the box. The factors that add up to be negative 7 are 2 and negative 9x, respectively. What you do now is you're going to place these factors in the open boxes. It does not matter for their order. And then what you're going to work on is factoring out the greatest common factor of your rows. I would like you to move it to the left side outside the box and then repeat with the bottom row. Then ask yourself what would multiply the outside numbers to give me the term inside the box. So we're going to start with factoring out a 3x squared on the top and a 2 on the bottom, and then what times 3x gets you 3x squared? It's an x. 2 times x is 2x, and then what times 3x gets us negative 9x? That value is a negative 3. And then what I would like you to do is to take 2 times negative 3 and see if you get negative 6. That number or constant box is your check box. Your factors that are on the outside are now your binomials that you have factored the quadratic. So what you do is you take them and write them as the product. The original factor GCF of 3 times the product of 3x squared plus 2 times, the sum of 3x plus 2 times the quantity of x minus 3. Now there's another method, I call it the broker's method, but some teachers call it the magic x method. Some teachers call it the illegal method. It's like the box method. You'll need to start by identifying your terms. You also need to multiply them to find out what factors of them add up to be the second term. It's just your placement of your factors, but the number one rule is you always got to factor out the greatest common factor no matter what. So we're working with the same quadratic of 9x squared minus 21x minus 18. And then what we do is we put 2 sets of parentheses, and we identify our terms, and we put the number of the first term, the constant, in the front of each group of parentheses, and then you will bring in x from the x squared down, and then to find the second values we're going to use the magic x, or just listing out your terms of a times c, or your first term times your second term. The reason why we use the 3x in front of both is because we're not going to try to make our factors work for us, or we're going to try not to do guess and check. What we're going to do is we're going to make the factoring work for us. So when you multiply your first terms, like we've already done before, 3 times negative 6 equals negative 18. The factors of negative 18 that add up to be a negative 7 are 2 and negative 9. So now you're going to place them in either parentheses. Since they both contain 3x, the order doesn't matter, just kind of like with the box method. And now, between each group, you're going to find another greatest common factor, or what is the factor that is the biggest that you can divide out of it. On the first binomial, there's no GCF, so we leave it as 3x plus 2. On the second one, we have 3x minus 9, so we divide out the 3 that is shared between the 3 and the 9. And that final value that you divide out and the answer that you're left with for that binomial is your factor term. So there's your factor terms. What we're going to do now is I'm going to bring up an example of factoring worksheet.